St. James Cavalier was the country's Millennium Project, and I was brought in August of 1999. It was supposed to open at the end of December 1999, and as I had originally predicted, it did eventually open in September 2020. The cultural scene in Malta, particularly the contemporary cultural scene, was always there. It was there in the 60s, it was there in the 70s. It was always an underground movement. You had things like A Teatru, which was based in Tignes. You had visual artists like Caesar, who was doing experimental work, but also happenings. You also had fringe activities by people like the Marquis Shikruna and his mystique architecture over in Madlina. So there was always a thriving fringe. Even when it came to music, there were the heavy metal bands, but there was also a small niche contemporary scene. What the presence of St. James Cavalier wanted to do was to bring that to the forefront, to basically say, look, Malta is not just about history. Malta is also about the present and is also about the future. I remember when I was first appointed to the job, a friend of mine said, "Oh my God, the lunatic has taken over the asylum." And they were right. I belonged as much to the fringe as I belonged to mainstream. And yes, in my head, this space was, if you like, an asylum. It was an asylum for creativity. It was a space which didn't belong to me. I think the fact that I was a manager and not an artistic director was an interesting point, and it was one which I accepted fully, because in my vision, and this sounds weird because general managers don't have visions. Well, they do. And to be honest, general manager, artistic director, what was the difference? We were a group of 4, 5 people. We had to run the place. So when I was asked to take over the space, my conception was, okay, this is not my place. This is a place that must belong to the artists. They are going to make the space. They are going to give it the soul and the voice, and they are going to represent some of the ambitions of Malta. So, if you like, the idea of managing the place is not necessarily a bad thing, but managing not just from the point of view of the numbers, the accounts, the paying the bills and so on and so forth. Frankly, we had little money, so there was very little to do in that area. But it was a place which wanted to bring the artists together, to give them a home, to give them a place where they feel comfortable, and where they can experiment. We never wanted to be mainstream. I never said, okay, I'm going to be another Manuel Theatre. That was not our point. Our point was the opposite. Ours was a place for discovery. The amazing thing about Malta is it's an island on the periphery of 2 continents. Europe to the north, Africa to the south. Now, people speak about the centers. People speak about places like London, like Paris, like Rome or Milan. What they don't often realize is that these places are great to take a finished product. If you want to create, you don't want to be there. You want to be in a space where there is containment and where there is protection. You want to be in the periphery. And that is why some of the best festivals in the world take place not in London and Paris, but they take place in Avignon. They take place in Salzburg. They take place in Edinburgh. They take place in Brighton. They take place on the periphery. And there's a very good reason, because those are places where you can experiment, you can develop, More importantly, you can make mistakes. One of the first things I told my first board was, not only do I have a right to make mistakes, I have a duty to make mistakes. I need to allow the artists to get it wrong. I also need to be the safety net. So one of the roles I felt was very important was that I acted as, if you like, a sounding board. My job was to be able to tell people, that's a brilliant idea, go with it. Or, you know what, you really are exciting, but you're not ready for the public. I need you to go away, think this through again, come back to me. And talk to me in 6 months' time. Go have a think. Ask yourself these questions. Do whatever. In fact, one of the things that I always found very, very important was whenever we had a call, and what I would have is I would have basically invite specialists in their area, whether it's visual arts, performing arts, etc., to take a look at the submissions and to discuss them with them. So that we could create, if you like, the ongoing season. We never had a season as such. We were always a rolling season. It was always kind of 3 months. But what was important for me was not so much the yeses. Yeses were yeses, fine. We'll sit down, we'll talk details. I was more anxious about the no's and the maybes. Those are the ones I made a point of inviting them in and speaking to them and telling them why it was a no. Because that was my job. That was the job of this space. This job of this space was that people needed to feel a home, so that even when the project was rejected, they could still feel, come back next week. They could come back the week after, in a month, 2 months, in a year's time. This was a place where ideas could develop slowly. And if an idea needs protection, then we will protect it. If it is not ready, then we will say it is not ready, and we will say why it's not ready, and then we will see how we can help. For me, St. James as a space could close down tomorrow, and it would have still worked, because it was about concepts, it was about people. For me, one of the most important spaces was the coffee shop. Why? Because that's where the artists met. And we would argue, we would fight, we would discuss, but that was a good place to meet over a coffee, and have fun. Again, if you're not having fun, why are we doing this? So those were the thoughts that passed through my head when I was asked to take on the job. It was rough. It was bizarre. It was makeshift. When we first started, we'd even have a ticket system going, let alone a website and so on and so forth. I remember for the opening, we opened on the 22nd of September. We had workers taking out the last building materials. At 8:30, we had Lou Bondi presenting a live television program from the whole building. And literally, we had pop music going on over here. We had classical music in the music room. We had a major exhibition of Maltese contemporary art. We created, I remember Renzo Spiteri, I asked him to create pictures of the contemporary exhibition, where he went round the place and he played music to different pieces of compositions. And then for 3 days, we did it all over again. We had a program that would start at 10 in the morning and go on till 8, 9 at night. And every hour there would be different things happening. And one of the joyful things was having this 60-year-old woman going around asking me, when is that guy of the drums going to be performing again? Because I want to follow him around and I want to see the exhibition with him. And she'd seen it on TV. That was the whole point. That's what my aims were. And when I say my, I don't mean my at all, because that's so much the wrong aim of it. Contemporary art is about us. It's about all of us. It's about the now. And it's about the future. It's about our hopes and our desperations. And that was the vision that the few that we were, because we were about 5, 6 people, in all. And then slowly we got a cleaner, and slowly we added an accountant, you know. But that was the vision. That was what we were pushing, which meant that we had to do everything ourselves. But hey, that was the fun of it. You know, if the seats needed to be taken out in the theater, yeah, well, go ahead. Let's take them out. I'm not going to discuss this. I have to do it. The artist needs it. So yes, it felt like being in the fringe in a very small space rather than in a national monument. And I think that's what makes it such a wonderful space. Well, I'm terrible on anecdotes because I have the memory of a fish. I think, you know, the memories are both sweet and sour. I mean, one of my fondest memories was discovering new artists and seeing them grow. And we've seen a number, both in the performing arts and in the visual arts. And I don't want to mention names because then I'll forget somebody else and it'll go one thing and another. So, but for example, I can mention Acting House because they unfortunately no longer exist. But they came along and said, and this was Manduka and Irene Christ, you know, they wanted to start a company, and so they came to us, and it interested me because it was Maltese actors working with German directors, and I knew that German directors were absolutely, totally bizarre and wacko. And I thought, that's good, it's something we haven't seen. So we sat down and we formulated a budget, and out of that, we had a company which is a number of very, very important works, and basically worked with a lot of Maltese actors. With regards to the whole business of culture and the connection with a country, I think one of my biggest regrets in a way was having a building, because we had very, very small budgets at the time, and that was all taken up with the 5 or 6 wages that we had and paying water and electricity. You have to remember that this space was originally conceived as the younger brother or sister to the main space. The main space was the theatre next door, what is now Piazza Teatro Real, which was supposed to be a proper, fully functioning theatre. And in my head, in the concept I had, I said, right, so what is going to happen is that will become the main source of income because it's a big space, and we'll work on that and doing big productions that bring in the cash. And then this will use that cash to create stuff. Unfortunately, the second part of the project never happened, and when it did happen, it became Piazza Teatro Real, and when that became Piazza Teatro Real, it belonged to another foundation altogether. So there were times when I really wanted to close down the building. And the reason I wanted to close down the building is because I wanted to pass all the money to the artists, and I kind of felt, you know, let's take this out. Let's go and create a number of small St. James's, small centres for creativity in the towns and villages. And it's still something that I think should happen, because there's a lot of spaces which could be used properly. Theatres, large and small, exhibition spaces, and even outdoor spaces. For example, Mostar has the most beautiful Greek theatre, which is just behind, ironically enough, the Art and Design Institute of MCAST. That, I think, is one of the things that I regret most. We did work with the community because we had Nihai, who worked very well with Birgu, and out of that, there's even a report by the MTA, the Malta Tourism Authority, which spoke about the Nihai effect, where people started to take care much more of their village. They started getting money to fund renewing their balconies and restoration and so on and so forth. And the Birgu Local Council does a huge amount of work in terms of the creative aspect of keeping that city alive. And we were one of the first to do that. We also worked a lot with the young offenders, and we had a brilliant program with the young offenders, which again, we wanted to give them status. So their exhibition was on the walls of St. James, was on the outside, opposite the Prime Minister's office. I mean, how much more, upfront do you want to be? We were saying these people have a presence. They need to be integrated into society. They need to be given a second chance, and they need to be shown that they are worth something. Similarly, we had Opening Doors, which is still going strong as a separate institution. And again, there we're talking about not just making the general public aware of the creativity of people who have difficulties, let's put it this way, learning difficulties. But very often it is also about teaching the people around them the true worth of these young men and women and what they can offer to society. And we ourselves learned, because ultimately the whole point was to take ourselves out of the comfort zone. So, and that's one of the things I think I was really happy with, that we worked with a lot of young people who were at university, and we gave them possibilities to work with St. James, but more important, to discover things about themselves, to discover their own creativity, to discover their own talent, and have their own knowledge. So I think this was all stuff that wasn't happening before. We worked with other institutions. We worked with the Manuel Theatre. We worked with the various museums. We even worked with the OPM. They wanted to take students to see the Castilla and to see the cabinet room and so on and so forth. And they wanted to use St. James as a place to show their presentation. And we said no. We said, no, I'm sorry, we're not here for you to lecture presentations. But what we are here to do is to support creativity. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a program for you. And we are going to manage the program for you. And what that program consisted of was that we would divide the classrooms, usually have about 70 to 80 people, into 4 groups. Each of them would choose a leader. That leader would propose have a plan of action for what they want to do as a government, and then they would be voted for. And then we would create an opposition, and we would create a government, and they would have a cabinet meeting, and the others would have a shadow cabinet meeting and have budgets created. And after that, then they would go to OPM. And we gave these tools to the teachers so that afterwards, when they were doing social studies, they had something to work on. They had something. And it's the same thing, for example, with Café Scientifique. That was, again, we were approached by Edward Duca, and I said, of course we need science here. Science is a creative force. Science is about creativity, and this is why we avoided using the word art. We wanted to call ourselves a center for creativity because we believed that creativity comes in all sorts of places. So, for example, we would have, with the various embassies, we would have open days. We would have, for example, a whole day of China Day, where we would discover everything from having films to seeing Chinese calligraphy and having Chinese calligraphy workshops, or Chinese tea making. Or the same thing happened with the Japanese, because I remember, I think we had a sushi demonstration there, because that also is part of creativity. Whatever we invent, whatever mankind invents, is part of our creative diaspora. With regards to anecdotes, those are the anecdotes I would remember most. Those are the things I would remember most because they were active. They were about bringing people together, and also this is possibly one of the philosophies we had when it came to the idea of bringing people together. We always worked on what I call the carrot and stick philosophy, which is that there are 2 ways of getting a donkey to move forward. You can either put a carrot on a stick and hang the carrot in front of the donkey, and the donkey will go forward that way, or you can spank its backside with a stick and it will jump and go forward. And we kind of played that game as well. There were things which audiences came to because they were fun, they were simple, they were easy to understand. And there were things which shocked, there were things which upset, there were things which made people angry or dismayed or they couldn't understand. But this was also the interesting thing. We gave them permission to not understand. We wanted to give them permission not to like. What we didn't want is to make them feel stupid. So, as much as possible, that was also part of the debate, and that is why, for example, you would see me cutting tickets, you would see me running around and just, doing what needs to be done. I always thought it was very, very important that my presence was there, not as a GM, but as somebody who needed to see what people felt and thought and needed, and not just from the point of view of the audience, but also from the point of view of the employees, from the point of view of the front of staff. I think it was always important that I had my ear to the ground, not to criticize, but to understand and to be ready to take on criticism. Unfortunately, I still feel that people get defensive when they are criticized. Whereas when we had a series of dialogues called the Valletta Kreattiv Forum, my whole point was I needed to know what needed to be done. And I used to very often chair the meetings, and I was often the subject of criticism, and that was very helpful, because in that way I could appreciate where things were not up to scratch, and if I could do something about it, then I did. If I could not, then at least I would try to understand why I could not, and I would at least explain to people why I could not, and that that reason could be accepted or could not be accepted, and they have every right not to accept it. But at least there's dialogue, at least there is movement, and it's always there at the back of your head, and it's always there, ready to bug you and to make you reanalyze what you're doing and how your work is being seen outside these four walls. Because bear in mind, it is so easy, especially in a building like this, which was built to keep people out. And here we are, ironically enough, trying to ask people to come in. It's very, very difficult to do, and it's not an envious task. So at the very least, being able to listen to grievances, I think that was the least I could do. The next step would be to try and make it work, to try and do something about the grievance. So at least, even if I couldn't do 100%, then at least perhaps I can take 30%, 40%, Obviously, there are budget constraints, there are time constraints, and sometimes there are building constraints. It's not an easy building to live with, and sometimes you say, you'd like to do something and you can't because the building or the budgets don't help you. But, you also then try to think outside the box and say, okay, who can I work with? How can I make this happen? So it's a constant debate you have with others, with yourself. I suppose never being satisfied, never being happy, I mean, when I left in, I think, 2013, one of the reasons I left was because I felt it was time for somebody to come along and break down everything I did and start afresh, create something new and exciting, reinvent it, give it a new dynamic quality. I was really interested in reading, there was a lovely article by the artistic director of the Gatt Theatre, and he said exactly the same thing. He says there comes a time, he was only there for 5 years, I was here for 13, stupid. There comes a time when it's time to move on and to let somebody else take care of it. This is not your space. You're merely taking care of it till somebody else can take over the baby and see it grow up, you know. So I thought, look, I had it as a baby, now it's a teenager. The teens need to have its own sense of dynamism. It needs to be young and brash and even, you know, forget the baby steps. It needs to get out there and be a bit naughtier. I just feel that the worst thing any institution can do is to get stuck in the mire, to be satisfied with itself, to be happy with itself. No, self-satisfaction is a death knell when it comes to the arts, when it comes to creativity. Again, one of the things that we had, that we really prioritized in St. James was looking for talent and helping to nurture it. So I think it's lovely, the fact that, you know, when we first employed Daniel, you know, he was this young man who just kind of done all his theory work at university and so on and so forth. And so was brash and full of ideas. And so this space, I hope, gave him the time to start growing his wings within a safe environment where, you know, he felt he could grow. And the fact that he's still here means I hope that he could grow. I don't give advice to people. Who am I to give advice to anybody? I came in as a lunatic and I'll probably remain a lunatic. All I can say is be true to yourself. Don't let anybody pressure you. Understand what the organization requires, but more importantly, what the creative community requires, and help it to grow. Our time is always limited, whichever way we look at it, whether we decide to leave, whether we're pushed out, or whether things grow away from us. Because creativity is not something you can control. You can either ride the crest for a time, but you're not going to control the wave. It will go wherever it wants to go. So I think what I feel is that you just have to understand where it's going and do the best you can. I mean, really, that's all I can say. As long as you are honest in terms of what you want to do and what you think is needed, and you're always open to discussion and debate, you can't go wrong, really.